For over a decade, California was paralyzed by fear. A masked man who slipped through windows, watched families sleep, and vanished before anyone could catch him. He was a phantom who raped over 50 women, murdered 13 people, and taunted his victims long after attacks ended. And then, he disappeared. But nearly 30 years later, a citizen sleuth named Michelle McNamara gave him a new name, and with that, a new spotlight. This is the story of the Golden State Killer.
Buckle up. You're listening to Voltage and Villains. What's up, guys? I'm Phoenix.
And I'm Moira.
And like we said before, we're going to be covering the Golden State Killer in this episode. It all began in Sacramento, California in 1976. A man started breaking into homes always when no one was there. He'd leave shoelaces under couch cushions, unlock a window, and prep the house like a predator laying a trap. Then, later on in the night, he'd come back wearing a ski mask, gloves, and carrying a knife or a gun. He became known for shining a flashlight into the eyes of the women in the house, blinding her as he barked commands. And if a man was present, he'd force the woman to tie him up, then he'd tie her up, then reinforce the man's ties himself, making sure that the man couldn't move. Then he'd place dishes on the man's back and threaten, if I hear them clatter, I'll kill everyone in the house.
That is the most savage thing ever.
Then he'd take sentimental keepsakes. So things that he knew were sentimental to you, that's what he would take, even if it wasn't of value. Then he'd spend hours raping the woman in the other room. So the guys can hear the entire time and they can't move because they have a bunch of dishes on their back. And if they knock it over, then he said that he'd come out and kill them. He did this 22 times in his first year. So not only was it meticulously planned out, but then he got extremely good at it because he did it so many times. 22 times in 1 year is an average of about 2 times a month.
Yeah.
Which, I
Damn
mean,
near.
even doing it twice in a year is a lot for a crime like that. So doing it twice a month, that's a lot.
He really felt like he could get away with it. That's why he did it that often. He was like, I'm
And
going
you'll
to
see
get away
why
with it.
he thought he could really get away with it. So at this time, he was known as the Visalia Ransacker.
What?
Because he
Is
would
that the neighborhood?
Yeah, Visalia.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but then he'd also ransack their homes.
Oh,
So like I told you before, a lot of times he wouldn't take things that are of crazy value, but like your house was ransacked when he was done, even your fridge. So while he was doing this, sometimes he'd ransack your home and he wouldn't even take anything. He would just do that just to throw the police off because they're looking to see if valuable items are gone and, there's no fingerprints and nothing of value is gone. So at first he started targeting women who were home alone. But then one time the local newspaper mentioned he seemed to avoid the homes with men in them. He took that as a challenge and completely switched up his MO. And then his next set of attacks started becoming super fixated on couples.
The fact that he took what the newspaper said as a challenge is insane.
Yeah.
That he really put his pride and ego into killing people and doing all these things.
No, yeah, he definitely had pride in what he was doing because it was meticulously planned, always well thought out. He always knew how to vanish. He had to do a lot of prep just to do it.
That's what I'm saying.
He had to commit 2 break-ins per break-in.
Per break-in.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
He broke in before, set up the scene to make it easier to break in again. I've never heard of some shit
But that's
like
what
that.
I'm saying. I think he felt like it was a job for him. Like you know how you go to your job, whether you like it or not, you do your job because you get paid.
Yeah.
He took it as a job because he went there. He prepared so meticulously, and then he just meticulously vanished too. That's very scary. On a serial killer, that's the most scariest thing because that tells you that they don't care. They don't give a flip if they get caught or not.
But it's funny you should say that because there's a few times that victims said that they heard him crying and talking to himself under his breath, saying different things like, I'm sorry, Mom, or I'm sorry, Bonnie was another name that he would say. And they're like, this guy's fucking nuts, Yeah, it was wild. This was a wild time. It gets crazier than that. So one of the most harrowing stories came from Jane Carson Sandler, his 5th known victim. It was October 1976. Her husband had literally just left for work less than 10 minutes before, and her son had crawled into bed with her. He was 3 at the time. And then she heard the garage door slam. 3 minutes later, in came barging a built man with a ski mask, gloves, and a large kitchen knife. Jane offered him money, jewelry, and anything that he wanted in the house, but he hissed through clenched teeth because that's the way he used to talk, I guess, to try to, either he was really angry or he was trying to disguise his voice. And he said, "Shut up or I'll kill you." He then tied her up, took her son away, then dragged Jane out of bed and assaulted her. Another devastating story came in November 1977, where 13-year-old Margaret Wardlow was his youngest known victim. She woke up to a flashlight in her face. He tied her up and left the room. She listened, and he was in the kitchen, ransacking the kitchen and grabbing dishes. Then he went into her mother's room. Now, Margaret already knew that the MO was whoever's room he went to next after the dishes, or whatever victim that was in the house that he went to next after going to the kitchen. She knew that his MO was that he was grabbing dishes to put on the other person's body of the person that he would molest. So he would go to the kitchen, and usually if there was a man and a woman home, he's going to the guy next because he's putting the dishes on the guy so he can go and assault the woman.
Right.
So she knew, okay, if he comes into my room right after leaving the kitchen, he's going to go assault my mom. If he goes to my mom's room, he's going to come and assault me. So he heard him go into her mom's room, and she was like, okay, I know I'm going to get assaulted now. And that's exactly what ended up happening. But Margaret also knew that he fed off of fear. Like, he loved the fact that whoever he was victimizing was afraid in that moment. And as you can imagine, a built dude with a ski mask and a butcher knife that's catching you off guard, that's shining a flashlight and screaming at you.
I'll scare
and you
anybody.
just woke up. The amount of fear that you're showing him, if he's getting off on that, if you could be calm, cool, collected, he's not going to get what he's used to getting.
Yeah.
Which is why he keeps doing it in the first place. So with that in mind, she said, okay, I'm not going to feed him anything. I'm not going to show him that I'm scared. She said that it would take some of his power away. So as you can imagine, California is petrified of this dude by now.
In shambles.
He's not only meticulously planning out these things, he's not only robbing people, he's also beating people almost to death. He's raping women and children now at this point.
And taking stuff from your home. He's like doing all of the above.
He's doing all of the above except murdering people at this point. And
at that point.
Investigators are starting to think, we think that this guy actually might start escalating to murder. Like, he seems like he wants to murder, but just can't fully pull the trigger on it yet. So as you can imagine, because everyone in the city has in Northern California has a ton of fear right now, they're holding, press conferences and town halls. And in 1979, during a town hall meeting, a man stood up and declared, if he ever came into my house, I'd kill him.
Oh my.
Just a few months later, that same man's house was invaded, and the Golden State Killer nearly beat him and his wife to death. Like, that beating was one of the worst beatings that he had given anyone up until that point, which let the investigators know, okay, this guy is not only paying attention to media coverage, he's also showing up at these town halls as though he's a regular civilian. So he's among us, and he's paying attention.
He's playing the literal game of Among Us, which is scary.
Oh yeah, I remember that game.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is literally the game
That
of
is
Among
literally
Us.
the game of Among Us. Is which one of us is it?
Oh, that's crazy. In 1979, the rapes in Northern California stopped, but the violence didn't. It just evolved. This is when he actually started murdering his victims.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, because...
So the guy was right. So that cop that said he was probably going to start murdering soon was right.
He was right. Yeah, because in December 1979, Robert Offerman and Deborah Manning were killed. In March 1980, Charlene and Lehman Smith were found bludgeoned to death in Ventura. 5 months later, Keith and Patrice Harrington were killed in Dana Point. And February 1981, Manuela Withune was raped and murdered in her home. He was evolving his crimes over time and with what the media coverage was saying about him.
Yeah.
Right? It was like he was ransacking houses at first and robbing people. And then they said, okay, he's and beating people up. And they said, okay, but he's not really taking anything. And then he started taking things and beating people up. And then people started saying, yeah, he only attacks when the men aren't home. And then he started attacking and doing everything he was doing before when men were home. And then then somebody said, well, if he ever broke into my house and did that, I'd kill him. And he broke into his house
And damn
beat
near
him
killed him.
to almost death, but then escalated right after that one to actually killing people.
That's what's scary about this whole case, because this could happen. Like, I don't know if this could happen nowadays, but this could happen anywhere, and anyone could easily just be hiding amongst everybody, just playing good civilian. And it's not good, because you could tell, like I said before, he wasn't fully scared of consequences. He kind of didn't care. He just wanted to do it.
Exactly. And investigators knew that it would get to that point. Now, around this time, he had moved down to Southern California, and that's where he committed all of those murders, starting in December of 1979 to February 1981. So by July 1981, a realtor discovered Sherry Domingo and Gregory Sanchez dead. Sanchez had been shot and beaten badly, and Sherry had been bludgeoned to death in the bed.
So they all died very similarly?
Yeah, so everyone's is dying very similarly,
Okay.
and that's what makes Larry, who's a Northern California investigator, start to think that whoever's down in Southern California doing those murders was the same person that was up here doing them, because the MO is almost exactly the same. Even though they have no physical proof, this is the 80s, this is the late 70s, early 80s. So they don't have DNA technology. They don't have a lot of the technology they have now. And also police departments were not communicating with each other properly back then. So even though that he had a hunch that this is the same person, there's no way to physically prove that. Yeah. And every time he tried reaching out to these different jurisdictions to tell them,
ignore him.
Yeah, because back then, for some reason, there was a lot of ego when it came to police departments communicating with each other.
Even in the early 2000s, that was the case. Like, a lot of police departments, early 2000s, probably even now, sometimes like have like a certain ego of like, well, I'm gonna solve the case, and it's like, no,
I would definitely say a lot less now, because that's how criminals get caught a lot faster now. I don't think a lot of these police departments now are worried too much about as much as the notoriety, as much as they are actually solving the crimes now.
That's
I feel
very
like back
true.
then it was, we want to solve these crimes, but we also want the notoriety for the fact we solved them, because serial killing was still such like a new thing, and serial killer profiling.
That's very true. I feel like, actually, I take that back. I feel like nowadays, if police departments don't really communicate, is because there's something wrong within that police department, that something's
like
happening, shady, or corruption. I feel like that's really the case.
Exactly. Larry's also the same investigator that was the one that suspected that this person that was committing all of these burglaries would eventually escalate his crimes past just raping and burglarizing to actually killing.
Oh, wow.
So when a couple escaped an attack and survived, the killer took it as a personal insult, and there were no other survivors of any future attacks that he ever did. Then, after committing all those brutal murders in Southern California, he vanished. So no murders were linked to him for 5 years, between 1981 and 1986. And in 1986, he returned. In Irvine, California, Janelle Cruz was alone. She had invited a male friend over for the night because she was home by herself, and she was just scared to be home by herself.
Aww.
And while they were there, I guess watching TV, hanging out, chilling, talking, they heard noises outside, like something was in the bushes.
Oh, hell
And
no.
they brushed it off as it's probably just a cat or something, a stray cat. And, the friend eventually said, well, I have to go home. This was like later on in the night. He leaves, and shortly after he leaves, the Golden State Killer breaks in and bludgeons her to death. It was his final known crime.
Oh, that was it. That was the last crime he ever did.
1986.
Wow.
Yeah. Janelle Cruz.
So he took a 5-year break, murdered one more time, and then disappeared
vanished.
off the
Literally
face of the earth.
vanished. Yeah.
Wow.
So decades passed, and then one woman reignited the case. Her name was Michelle McNamara. She was a writer and wife of comedian Patton Oswalt. Some of you guys may know him from his stand-up specials, the sitcom King of Queens, the sitcom 2.5 Men, or the voice of Remy in Ratatouille. He also played in a whole bunch of other well-known movies. So she was his wife. She was a writer, but she wasn't just a writer. She was also a relentless citizen sleuth. So apparently she was so good at being a sleuth. Like, she just had a mind that was wired for true crime. You know how some people have a really good mind for, like, let's say Legos or jigsaw puzzles or video games. Like, her mind was like true crime, and she was really good at it. Wow. So she also had personal connections with investigators and things like that. So she had access to information that regular people would not have access to.
Yeah.
Which made her probably the best expert on the case. And it kind of consumed her life, and she started writing a book about it. And she realized that up until this point in 2013, right before she published this article about the East Area Rapist, the East Area Rapist, or better known as the Golden State Killer now, his nickname was Earons, spelled Earons, and it was short for East Area Rapist / Original Night Stalker. But Michelle knew that name lacked impact.
What? Yes.
Like, no one's gonna remember Earons.
First of all, who even makes a acronym for a serial killer?
For decades, that was the name that, if anyone knew about that killer from back then, it was Earons. And so she gave him a new one. She called him the Golden State Killer. She spent years obsessing over the case, researching, interviewing, following leads. But tragically, Michelle died in her sleep in 2016 at the age of 46 before she could finish her book.
Damn.
Now, she died. It came out years later what she died from, but I think she had an undiagnosed heart condition, as well as she was taking a lot of prescription medication. So plus, the stress of the case and probably not a healthy lifestyle, because she was spending all her time trying to write this book, as well as solve a cold case,
right?
That no one has been able to crack.
That consumes your life. Like, think about it. You go to work, right? You come home, you do what you want to do. You work on your side projects. You eat, you sleep, you go to the gym, and you understand. But a life like that, it's very rough, because you're always. Like, it doesn't end until you find the killer.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Like, when do you have off? Like, you never clock out.
Yes. You're always there. You're always thinking about,
there's always people
how
to
could
talk
he be
to.
doing?
Yeah.
Yes.
And then apparently she would hit her husband at the time, Patton Oswalt, the actor, the comedian. He said that there was times that she would follow down a lead so heavy, because she's like, oh yeah, like this might crack it. And then get there and be like, fuck, like it led nowhere, So then it's like, so now she has to restart back to square one, trying to file down new leads. So in 2013, she released the article which renamed him the Golden State Killer. And that's how people like me, even in like 2015, when I was in college doing research papers on serial killers, that's how I was able to write the Golden State Killer. And he was actually on my radar too, as a serial killer that's never been caught, because she kind of resurfaced it, and she had all these new details that we had never heard before. After she died, her work still lived on. 2 months after her passing, a national campaign was launched to finally catch this man. This is almost 40 years after he started. No, not almost. This is 40 years after he started, after the Golden State Killer did his first crime, that now there is like an official head-on gung-ho task force dedicated to bringing this man to justice. And the reason for this is because law enforcement was feeling the pressure of time.
Yeah.
As witnesses and victims were getting older. And the same would be for the killer and everyone that he's related to.
Yes, because think about it, 40 years later, if let's say he started making these crimes and he was doing these crimes when he was 30, 40 years later we'll put him at 70. A lot of people don't make it past like 65. Yeah. Like, so he's probably going to be dead, and you're not going to be able to find anything, and the case is going to go cold. Like, that's why, like,
go cold. The case has been cold.
Well, no, it's going to
turn ice.
Yes, it's going to turn ice.
It was cold as shit before. Now it's frozen in time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's the problem with like not figuring these things out in time when they're exactly happening. And like we said before, police withholding information, not enough technology to be able to figure out DNAs, and just all those things. Like, I mean, you can't blame everything on the police, because there's some things that you can control, like technology, but there is to some degree like a sense of urgency, because the victims are dying. The probable person who did this crime is probably dead by now.
Exactly.
So
kind of like the Zodiac killer, where it's like the main suspect that we can probably say today 99.9% did it, died what is it, 6-7 years before I was even born. So he died almost 30 something years ago now. So it's like,
you're gonna go dig up his grave to
it's
DNA
like now we
test
need
it?
actual DNA to the people who died, but then he killed them by gun. So it's like there's just a lot of
It's
stuff
a lot
that could
of
go left.
exactly.
It's funny you mentioned technology because in 2001 there was advancements in forensic DNA that connected the rapes from the Northern California crimes to the Southern California crimes, which actually proved Larry's, the detective that suspected that it was the same person.
Yeah.
It actually confirmed like, oh, all of these are the same person.
Yeah,
Then
because that's the thing, right? As a criminal, when you rape someone, like you're exchanging bodily fluid, so you can't get away. It's not like you're just going up to them, robbing them, killing them with a gun, and disposing of the gun. Like your DNA, your bodily fluids are on this person, so they're gonna go get a rape kit or whatever they had at the time, and they're gonna collect evidence and data, and it's gonna show up. It's
and that's
not a gun.
exactly what they did. And good thing they did that the proper way, because I bet you money there's a lot of cases that took place back then in which DNA was not swabbed for or contaminated or whatever. And then when they could have probably linked it to somebody in the early 2000s, it didn't get because of bad police work. So a good thing on the police during that time for swabbing for DNA and things like that. The Golden State Killer's crimes actually ended up changing a law in California in 2009 that still sticks to this day. In 2009, a new California law required anyone arrested for a violent crime to submit a DNA sample, which I think is really good.
Yeah.
Because it would mean that we can tie you to other violent crimes that we didn't know you either did before, or we could tie you to any violent crimes that you tend to do after.
Yeah.
Because an offender of a violent crime is most likely to do another violent crime.
Well, not just that. If you have your rights, you have your privacy, you have your things where you're able to kind of do whatever you want and roam freely as long as you're not harming people or doing crazy things, right? When you violate that, yes, you should definitely submit a DNA sample, saliva, blood, fingerprints, hair, eyes, everything.
That way, if you do this shit again, we should be able to know it's you. Like, we should not have to go on a manhunt for you.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so it's good. It's good. And that law is actually the law that ended up changing everything. Because by 2018, detectives used a website called gedmatch.com, a public genealogy website, to plug in the Golden State Killer's DNA profile. They were trying to narrow it down, using geographic data, physical traits, old family trees. And they were finally able to narrow it down. And they got one name that matched in the middle of all these people that it matched to. Joseph James DeAngelo was his name. So when they did some background checking on Joseph James DeAngelo, they found out that he was a former police officer.
Oh my gosh.
He was fired in 1979 for shoplifting a hammer and dog repellent. He had a wife, now his ex, who was a lawyer, and he had 3 daughters. Now, in all the documentaries and all of the articles that I've read on this case, I don't see anybody talking about, the spiritual karma that's involved in this, right?
Yeah.
But isn't it crazy that a serial killer ends up falling in love and marrying a lawyer, and he's also a rapist, and he ends up having 3 daughters, not one son. You had 3 daughters, and you married a lawyer. Like, I just think that that's like the weird way that the universe works.
Yeah. It's the universe's
It's like,
way of balancing things out.
Now you fair, and I obviously nobody wants anything to happen to his daughters.
No,
That's not what I'm saying.
of course not.
What I'm saying is that's the universe's way of saying, okay, now
you go worry about your daughters.
Now you go worry about whatever you did to all these other daughters and moms happening to your daughters, because you had 3 kids and all of them ended up being women, just like the women that you'd go out and rape.
But my question is, hold on. Now, this is what I'm intrigued at.
How the hell did his wife not?
Well, no, not
catch on?
Partially, but no. First of all, when he stopped committing those murders, right? Mm-hmm. Is that when he met his wife? Is that when they married? Does that, did you ever find that out?
No. So he was fired for shoplifting from the force in 1979.
Right.
1979.
That's when he started going ham with his crimes.
1979 was the year that he went from Northern California to Southern California.
Okay.
And that's where he started murdering people, December 1979.
Is that time period that he took a break a possible time period where he could have met his wife?
That's a good question because, yeah, I actually did not look at when he met his wife. Yeah,
Because it could be a probably really close time period.
Maybe that is the time period when he met or married his wife. I don't know that. But one interesting detail that now that you made me go back over and look at these dates, I'm starting to notice if he had 3 kids, it would mean that his hands are full. Kids have school, kids have all these things. All of these crimes happen at time periods where his kids could have been on break, which would give him the time to actually do these crimes. December, that's holiday break time. March, that's spring break time. 5 months later from March is August. That's summertime still. That's like the last bit of vacations that people take. February, that's like midwinter break. These are all times where possibly if he did have a wife and kid, that they were on a trip somewhere. Or the wife was home with the kids because, or he knew that the kids were home sleeping. So, and they don't have school in the morning, so he can go out and do the.
Do you know what job he worked after he moved down to Southern California?
He became a mechanic.
A mechanic?
Yes, he became a mechanic and he retired actually from that job of being a mechanic. Yeah.
That's quite interesting. I have a little weird theory that could probably be wrong based on the dates in which he met and met his wife and had his kids. But I believe that he probably had like a larger pause in between that time period, and then he killed one more person and then stopped killing. I theorize that he met his wife in that time period, and then right before getting married, he was just like, you know what? I'm gonna like just get it out of my system. And then he killed the one last person and then he stopped.
Joseph DeAngelo actually married in November of 1973. So he started committing those crimes 3 years after being married.
Last thing, right? You said that he got married in 1973 and he started committing his crimes in 1976,
Yes.
Right? I wonder what his wife thought when he was shoplifting a hammer and whatever other
Dog
item.
repellent.
Yes.
I have no idea.
Your lawyer wife married to a cop. The cop gets fired for shoplifting a dog repellent and a hammer? Question mark. That's a very suspicious behavior.
Yeah, it's funny that he was able to do this, without his wife finding out. Or maybe she knew. Who knows? You would never know if the wife knows. That's the crazy thing. You would never know. She could probably know and then just be like, all right, just not going to say anything. But I doubt it. I doubt a lot of people are like that. So it all pointed to this one man, Joseph James DeAngelo. But they still had to match his now physical DNA to the DNA that they know belongs to the Golden State Killer.
Dang.
And in order to do that, they followed him around. So they took some of his DNA, I believe, off his car door. And then they followed him to his house. They went to his house and they waited till he threw out trash. They went through the trash and they found a tissue that he had threw out. And they matched that DNA from the tissue to the Golden State Killer's DNA that they had in the system. And it was a match. He had been living just minutes away from the home of Jane Carson Sandler, who was his 5th victim in the 1970s. So he was still living in the area. And even people that he worked with, they said, I would have never known. Because apparently he was living just like a normal life. There's pictures of him fishing, kids' birthday parties, wedding anniversaries. He lived a completely normal life after the 80s. Now, he was born in 1945. He stopped killing in 1986. That would have made him 41 years old, which would make sense because 35, I believe after the age of 35, that's when you get out of your physical peak as a male. A lot of his descriptions were of a well-built male. And mind you, he started in 1976.
And he was a cop.
And he was a cop. So that would have made him 31 when he did that.
Dang,
and I believe that at age 30, you actually are at your peak physical strength as a male. Age 28 to like 33 is like your peak strength. So it would make sense in my if I'm like, just adding some of this outside knowledge into his time frames here, it would make sense that he had that 5-year run of his last bit of his prime Then somebody escaped him because he had one or two instances where it didn't go so easy. Like he had one instance where the man charged at him and he had to actually fight the guy like a lot just to get him. He still ended up killing him, but he had to fight him a lot. And this was in the later years of doing his crime. Okay. So it got to a point where I guess he started to realize my physical skills are just not the same of where it was. So he took a break. Then in 1981, my fault. In 1986, when he's 41 years old, now you're past your prime. And now back then, you don't have TRT. You don't have testosterone replacement therapy, right? So testosterone's going down. Physical strength is going down. You can't run as fast. You can't jump as high. You can't crouch and move like you used to. So attacking these couples are just no longer in the equation. So it would make sense why he just went back to his regular old MO. Wait till the man leaves, attack the woman. And then he probably realized after that, I don't have it in me anymore. I can't do this anymore. Or maybe he did it at that point, and you know his daughters at that point are probably reaching around the same age that this little girl that he just killed. Maybe he started getting some compassion. But it would make sense that after having kids and kids getting older, that you're starting to look at life a little differently, as well as I can't do this the way that I used to do.
Yeah, and he as a cop, he knew that the second he messed up, he was going to get caught.
Yeah. So he said, before I end up getting caught, let me chill.
Yeah. And that's also how he actually got away with a lot of this freaking stuff. He was a freaking cop.
And it's crazy because that was the only testimony that said anything about anyone having any idea that he was in and around their house. Because remember, all the other victims before were caught completely off guard. This instance, he actually almost kind of got seen right before he did it. Yeah. Because they heard a noise out in the bushes. So that clearly means he can't move around as stealthy as he used to.
Yeah.
All the other times before, he was able to break in before, set up all this stuff, leave, come back.
That's done.
And no one ever heard him, except for when they heard the garage door slam. But even at that point, he was already in the house.
It's
this
too
was
late.
The first time that, like, before he even got in the house, before the man ever even left, they heard him. They just didn't go investigate. You know, they're teenagers.
Yeah, they're not thinking much about it.
Yeah. They're more likely to brush it off than to even go look out the window. So, yeah.
That's insane.
So in June 2020, Joseph DeAngelo was offered a plea deal. To avoid the death penalty, he pleaded guilty to 13 counts of murder and 13 counts of kidnapping. But more chilling than that, he admitted to 160 uncharged crimes, including dozens of rapes. For 3 days, survivors and their families gave their statements in court. He never looked at any of them. He always looked straight and had a stone cold face on. It was also during the pandemic, so he was also wearing a mask, so you couldn't really see like his mouth and everything. But
do you know he probably had a smirk under that mask?
No. He didn't, because when it was finally his time to speak, DeAngelo, who was now 74,
oh my goodness,
said, "I'm truly sorry to everyone I've hurt." That's basically all he said. I'm truly sorry to everyone that I've hurt.
You see, that's the thing. I don't believe that.
When I saw him say it, I believe him.
You believed him?
I believe him.
You know how I don't believe him?
But I believe him.
You know how I don't believe him? Because how do you get caught living in the same neighborhood that you killed your fifth victim in? That's extremely creepy. You're still 74 and you're living in that neighborhood that you committed this crime in.
So what I mean by like I believe him is because remember I told you before he had proposed to a woman named Bonnie, right? Oh no, I didn't tell you this before. Apparently back in the day, he dated a woman named Bonnie. He even proposed. He got engaged. Bonnie said yes. But then he became like kind of abusive and creepy. And she said, let me get out of here. I think at one point he even put a gun to her head and was saying like, oh, you need to marry me, all this other stuff. And she got away from him. And she's like, yeah, that's her only regret in life is saying yes to this dude, even at one point. And that's the same name that he would
keep calling out.
That he would call out while he was doing these crimes. Sometimes some people have said that they heard him crying and that he would say the name Bonnie over and over. And then some other times he'd cry and say things like, you know, I'm sorry, Mom, or different things. When they first arrested him, the next day when he was in the interrogation room, you know, they have a camera on you. And they had a camera on Joseph James DeAngelo. And he's sitting there and he's talking to himself. The same way that all of his victims who survived said he was kind of talking to himself. And some of the things that he said was he had like an alter ego named Jerry. that would talk him into doing these bad things, and he didn't want to necessarily do it. So it's kind of like,
okay,
it's kind of like he wanted to do it. You know,
Yeah.
you're still your own person, even
Yeah.
if in your mind you have an alter ego.
Yeah.
But like, you know, everyone has habits or addictions or things that they just can't seem to shake.
Yeah.
And like, apparently doing this sadistic behavior was one of them. For him, was killing and murdering and
raping,
and so he always would feel bad that he did it after he did it, he said. But he was just addicted to doing it, and that he had this alter ego named Jerry that would talk him into doing it.
I think that's why he became a cop. Because you have the ultimate, like, as a cop, you don't have the ultimate power, but you have a lot of power in most situations. You have a gun, you have like a taser. Like most times people are either afraid or angry at you, or when you pull out the gun, like you have the power.
Or maybe he became a cop thinking it would make him not do that stuff. It's hard to say. We're not in his head. It could either been good or it could either been bad. Either way, he did bad. But that's why I'm just giving the reason as to why when he said what he said, because he sounded like he was choking up a little bit as he said it, because he didn't have much to say.
Okay.
He just stood up and slowly said, you know, I've listened to every single one of you guys' testimonies.
Okay.
And I just want to say I'm truly sorry to everyone that I've hurt. Then he pauses. Then he kind of just has nothing else to say. Because what more is there to say?
Yeah,
he's like, I've done this bad shit. I've hurt all these people clearly. I've already beat myself up over it. I'm gonna reap what I sow. I'm gonna sit in prison for the rest of my
life.
10, 15, 20 years, maybe potentially, that he even has to live. And yeah, that was it. So a lot of people don't believe him. I believe that he actually is sorry, right?
Okay,
he has daughters.
Now I do.
Yeah,
now
he has daughters.
I see it.
I would like to believe that he is actually sorry.
Yeah.
But him being sorry or not doesn't bring people back.
No, it doesn't
right?
change
So
what he
it doesn't
did.
matter whether or not he's sorry or not. What he did is what he did, and he deserves to rot in prison and hell for that. But I do believe that he was sorry. Now, the Golden State Killer thought he had gotten away with it for decades. He vanished into the suburbia, raising daughters, living a quiet life, but he underestimated the people who never stopped looking. Let's give a shout out to Michelle McNamara, who refused to let this evil be forgotten, that ended up writing the article that changed his name and ended up writing the book that then reignited this case and this investigation.
Yep.
And then even got it to the point where, you know, I believe, in my opinion, I believe she is 70% of the reason why he even got caught. Because if that name never changed from that acronym that I can't even freaking remember.
Iran?
I don't even know. I don't even want to look back at that acronym.
Iran or
right?
something like that.
Iran, yeah. If it wasn't for her changing that name, I don't think a lot of people would have known. I don't think the book probably would have even did as well because, you know, titles matter.
Yeah.
And maybe they wouldn't have even reignited this case. So I firmly believe and am grateful that Michelle McNamara, rest in peace to her, is the reason why Joseph James DeAngelo was now identified in the pandemic as the Golden State Killer. In conclusion, what I do want to say is we're going to put up the pictures of him and the description, the composite sketch that they've had for years of how he looked in the ski mask side by side. And I'm going to tell you this right now. In the fucking ski mask, in the ski mask, in the composite sketch, and his actual face at 74 years old, 18 years old in his yearbook, 30 years old in the police force, all that. I could tell that that's him through the ski mask in a composite sketch. Even the little lip, like how his lip kind of droops down at the bottom, you can see that in the composite sketch from when he's young, and you could see that as a 74-year-old man. The second I saw that sketch and the second I saw his face and they said DNA match, I go, that's the guy.
Glad they caught him. I'm glad Michelle McNamara did what she did. She is the GOAT of all internet sleuths and armchair detectives. That is who. If you're an armchair detective, that is who you should aspire to be.
MVP netizen.
No, MVP for real.
MVP netizen.
MVP for real.
Go.
RIP.
All right, guys, that concludes this episode of Voltage and Villains. If you enjoyed this episode, like the video if you're watching it on YouTube.
Drop some cases that you would like us to cover in our next few episodes.
And if you're listening on Spotify, turn on automatic downloads. That way, by the time you open up the app, our newest episodes that we drop are already queued up and you could just listen to it on your way to work, right before you go to sleep, wherever you like listening to it. And until next time, be safe and take care.